today's topic will be Colorado. And of course, as I always do, I start off with the paranormal. Often enough, the paranormal is a topic that most don't like talking about or hearing about. To some, it's scary, and to others, it messes with their worldview. But to me, it's always been so fascinating. Why are there ghosts? Are they truly spirits of the dearly departed, or recordings of a tragic event forever seared onto the earth? Or are they a mix of both? And if so, the question still remains, why? I can't answer that, but I can bring to light some of their stories, some obscure and others forgotten to time, only to resurface now as legends of ghostly goings-on. Most famous of these haunted places out in Colorado is Cheeseman Park. This park started off as Prospect Hill Cemetery in 1858, lasting only 2 decades before falling into disrepair. Given that so many different sections of the cemetery were meant for different religious groups and organizations, each responsible for their own maintenance, only certain parts were adequately kept up, and by the late 1880s, it had become a rarely used and unsightly sight. After a while, folks wanted to convert the land into a town park. Why is still a mystery. As anyone with half a mind knows, it's not a good idea to disturb sacred ground. Still, families were given 90 days to relocate their loved ones, and while some could, others could not. This left nearly 5,000 bodies left unclaimed. The hauntings truly began when the contracted gravedigger, E.P. McGovern, was paid to move these bodies and came up with a plot to make more money, split up the bodies into smaller coffins. The body removal was stopped, but the damage had been done. No new contract was given to anyone else, so after all was said and done, roughly 2,000 bodies remained as the park began its conversion. Now, reports are frequent of ghostly activity, frequent feelings of confusion or sadness, and moans and wails come from the fields where graves once laid open. Children and women have been seen as they wander the park, before suddenly disappearing. What was supposed to be a place of final rest became a place of play and relaxation, then a place of confusion, sadness, and dread. Hopefully, someday, there can be peace for these poor lost souls. From a haunted city park, we now turn to a haunted trail called Helen Hunt Falls. Now, this trail has been featured in numerous reports of unexplained voices and strange occurrences. Some claim the souls of accident victims still roam the trail and area around the falls, but other stories tell of a more malevolent presence. A paranormal group went up to the falls to do some investigating of the claims when they had an encounter they'll not soon forget. Starting with EVP work, they heard voices of children, but then one of the girls wanted to go down a previously unnoticed trail. At the end of the trail was a boulder on which the girl leaned on, staring at the water as if in a trance. Then she collapses, and on being brought off the trail, she came to, got some rest, before bolting back to the trail with the other members racing back after her. Now along this trail is a drain pipe, of which the girl stopped at, pointed and stared at, and had to be dragged kicking and screaming away from, as if possessed by some unearthly force. She collapsed again, and when she came to, she couldn't remember a thing. Another man in the same group collapsed and had a vision of a creature with a sunken face and long claws gutting 2 hikers on the very boulder on which the previous girl had leaned on. Now, before all this had occurred, as they were hiking the trail, They all experienced an electronic failure, leading them to turn off their equipment, which is unusual because they almost felt compelled to turn them off, which is not their usual practice to stop recording mid-investigation. Now, whether haunted or not, these stories garner possibility as the paranormal research field grows every single year. Now, while I love a secluded hiking trail as much as the next person, we'll move on now to a more public place. The Boulder Lodge number 9 of the Independence Order of the Odd Fellows. It has been active in ritual and revelry since 1899. During the construction restoration in 2000, strange occurrences began to happen, as is often the case with restoring old historic buildings. Ghostly footsteps up and down the old wooden staircase have been reported, along with the same footsteps approaching the threshold of whatever room the member reporting the sounds are in. Some of the activity can be blamed on Wilbur, a long-since dead member who dedicated his life, and perhaps his afterlife, to the lodge. From phantom footsteps to the smell of tobacco in the air, Wilbur has been made the cause of all manifestations of odd events in the Oddfellows Lodge, showing that their motto of friendship, love, and truth extends beyond the grave. Now next we move on to one of the most famous haunted landmarks there is, the Stanley Hotel. It is said that wherever there is life, there are ghosts. And that may be the reason for hotels, especially the Stanley Hotel, to have their hauntings. While many report strange phenomenon going on around the hotel, there haven't been many tragic deaths surrounding the famous and historic inn. Child ghosts are reported on the 4th floor, though no deaths have occurred of any children on the property. One ghost is that of chambermaid Elizabeth Wilson, who survived a gas explosion on the 2nd floor and worked in the hotel until she was 90 years old. Guests have reported such things as a wedge coming between sleeping couples and single men having their bags packed as they sleep overnight, all attributed to her. Another report tells the tale of a man who witnessed a green-eyed beast in the walled-off basement during a construction period in the hotel's history. Now these are all just wild tales. No living proof can actually show that the Stanley Hotel is haunted, other than Stephen King's stay in his creepy novel based off of the hotel. Lastly, we move on from fame and fortune to a place where ghostly hauntings and unexplained events are common. These are the dancing lights of Cross of the Assumption and Silver Cliff cemeteries. Now this cemetery is a special one. It's been split off into sections for Protestant and Catholic faiths, but the mysterious lights make no distinction about where they are seen. These ghostly blue lights have been seen for as far back as 1956, in which an article was written in the Wet Mountain Tribune, and in 1969 they were recorded in National Geographic. Legends have it that these lights are the lights of miners who died while searching for silver ore. There have been many attempts to explain away such flickering luminescent orbs, but from reflections to radioactive ore, from ghost investigators to county judges, no one and nothing can truly enlighten us on what these lights around the cemetery truly are. For now, they still remain a mystery. Death surrounds these figures, whether the places, the people, or the events, but death is around each and every one of us. These stories are there to remind us of those who came before and those who are still around. They remind us of the consequences of life, of good and evil deeds, what separates us and what unites us. But overall, these macabre tales show us that life and death are always teetering on a thread. and sometimes the line blurs, crossovers happen, and the veil lifts. You know, after peeking under the veil of our world in the afterlife, I find it refreshing to hear about some old-fashioned mysteries, settle down with a few fossil stories of long-extinct dinosaurs, and relaxing with a bit of history and intrigue that stirs the mind and fills the sense of adventure we struggle to find in our day-to-day. I'll dive into these stories, and maybe they'll set off a bit of adventure in you too. Our first stories are about the fossils of Colorado. Now, fossils have always been an all-time favorite study material of mine. I have loved learning and knowing about fossils ever since I was young. They come in many different shapes and sizes and forms, from insects and feathers trapped in amber to stony representations of creatures from the distant past. And I just love each and every one of them. That being said, the Midwest states like Colorado have an abundance of fossils. Some you can even unearth by digging in your backyard. The ones I'll feature here are the dinosaur tracks embedded in the dry earth of Golden and Morris in Colorado. A group that studies these tracks, called the Dinosaur Trackers Research Group, was started by a professor of geology, a Dr. Martin Lockley, who studies fossil footprints. These impressions left by these mighty beasts, and some left by smaller but still mighty beasts, help show more than just the bone fossils ever do. They show behavioral patterns, migrations, herding behavior, and their daily activities. Far from just holes in the ground, fossilized footprints can show us life before we ever came along, and how the earth was active and alive, recorded by the very crust itself. Getting a little sidetracked here, as we speak of ancient creatures, this is one that is found, or should I say sighted, all over the world. Even each state has one, or several, ranging from diminutive to massive. That's right, it's time for another bit of Bigfoot lore. Our first hairy, ape-like creature comes out of the Garden of the Gods. It stands about the average 7 to 8 feet tall. It's covered in reddish-brown hair, and it's been seen in just about every state we visited so far, in some form or another. This creature has reddish-yellow eye reflection too, giving it probably fairly decent night vision. Our next Bigfoot encounter comes from Native American tales in the sacred Sangre de Cristos Mountains on Holy Blanca Peak. Now, given that this is what we know as Bigfoot today, it still surprises me that these creatures are as old as to be featured in Native American legends. Some give it Wendigo attributes, man-eating and monstrous, while other stories give it an elder brother and spiritual aid kind of vibe. A sighting occurred in 1990, where a Kansas family was vacationing in a cabin near Lake Fork Ranch when they came in close contact with a hairy, bipedal creature. Its head brushed up against the cabin's eaves, about 8 feet or so, and when spotted, it sprinted off into the forest. 3 years later, in the same area, another encounter shook this family once again. The creature this time stood about 150 feet away, screeching and roaring like something akin to a deeper elk call, with lower reverb, a sound that vibrates your very bones. Needless to say, they got out of there, but further investigation the day after this encounter revealed footprints, tracks unlike a bear, each about 17 inches long. Whatever these creatures are, most are skeptical, laughing off reports as wild imaginations. But what the skeptics can't account for is the physical evidence. If all of the reports are false, how do they explain away the gigantic tracks left behind by these sightings? From Bigfoot to a more diminutive figure, we move on now to an old miner's tale, the Tommyknockers. In the old mines of the 19th century, where folks used to mine for gold and silver in the Rockies, they would also hear a strange sort of knocking in the darkness. These old miners, often of Cornish descent, knew exactly what was making these knocks, however. The mysterious little people, the knackers, the bukas, twisted down the line into what we know now as Tommyknockers. The name bukas, consequently, reminded me of the Irish puka, but that's a tale for another day. They appear in mines throughout the West, wherever Cornish men and women made their way among the mines and mining towns. These little beings, mine dwellers as they were generally helpful unless they weren't given the proper respect. They would knock to warn miners of gas leaks or mine collapse, giving miners time to escape a potentially tragic situation. Moving from one legendary creature to another, we see the Anu Sinam. This is the Hopi word for those mythical beings we refer to as the Ant People. Legend has it that they helped the ancestors of the Hopi survive two cataclysmic events, one where the earth ended with fire and the other in ice, what we think of as volcanic and ice age events. They are portrayed as generous and industrious, helping the ancient Hopi people with food gathering and storage techniques and giving them supplies when they had none. It is said that the Ant People helped the Hopi build the Mesa Verde stone structures, stony apartments nestled under the eaves of cliffs, which would explain why they appear like giant ant hills. What's interesting here is that the Sumerian Anunnaki, otherworldly beings many associate with ancient alien encounters, resemble the Anu Sinam. Anu is a Babylonian sky god, whereas the word Anu in the Hopi language is ant, and the word Naki means friends, making Anunnaki in Hopi ant friends. Were the Anunnaki and the ant people of Hopi legend one and the same? I'll leave that up to you. Leaving the legendary creatures behind for a moment, let's move on to some mysteries. Colorado is full of them, but I've focused on about 2 or 3 of them here. The first is the mystery of the missing Merci train car. After World War II, American citizens were asked to send donations of food and clothing to the people of France and Italy. Given their 700-car American friendship train, the French, namely a French veteran named André Picard, decided to repay their kindness with a trainload of gifts from them. Thus, 1 boxcar was filled and made for each state. World War I transport models colored red and adorned with shields represented each French region were used. These became known as the Merci cars, named for the gratitude felt by the people of France. Now, being made of wood, 2 states lost theirs to fires, and Rhode Island's wound up in a junkyard, but it was rescued, repaired, and restored by 2005. Only Colorado's has completely gone missing, having disappeared in 1954. Last seen near the town of Eagle, up near Vail, the Colorado State Archives and Historical Societies have no clues as to its whereabouts from there. From one mystery to another, we move to the Great Sand Dunes in the San Luis Valley, which is a 40-square-mile field of sand dunes rising as high as 700 feet above the valley floor. The scientific story behind how it got there is that it was blown from the Rio Grande riverbed to the west, being trapped by the mountain range Sangre de Cristo. But in reality, geologists say that that's as good a story as any, as no good explanation really explains where the sand dunes came from. The sand is made up of the purest silica on Earth, and geologically, There's no common mineral deposits that could explain why these sand dunes are there. Then there are the color changes, which depend on the lighting, from golden to light chocolate to purple or nearly black on cloudy days, to bright red in the sunset and a pale, nearly glowing hue in the moonlight. A few legends persist about this place, given its more mysterious nature. One tells us that while wild horses avoid the area due to the unsteady footing and shifting sands, on bright, moonlit nights or just before sunrise, you can see a very different breed silhouetted on the sandy ridges. What sets them apart is that while no one has been able to get close enough to them, their hoofprints appear webbed. Another tale tells of disappearances, of sheep herders and one unfortunate family of homesteaders, found dead except of a young boy, who was rendered mute, and later disappeared too, his trail ending at the dunes. Here we'll brush the dust off our boots, as if that's hardly possible out here in the Wild West, and go and explore ghost towns. Colorado and many of the Midwestern states have ghost towns from the times of the Wild West and the Gold Rush boom. People left these towns as the mines dried up and work became scarce. Now, some people are trying to preserve, if not downright revive, these old towns and some of the spirit of the Wild West with them. Over in Como, Colorado, this town was founded by an Italian immigrant back in the 1859 gold rush and was named after Lake Como in Italy. As a boomtown, it had around 500 residents, growing along the railroad and providing a center link for Denver, South Park, and the Pacific Railroad. As the mining declined, the trains left and the town began to dry up, though today, Como is slowly returning to life using its historic charm and character. From the golden aspen in the autumn to the hiking, biking, and skiing opportunities, Como provides ample recreational activities year-round. Besides that, it serves as the south entrance to the Boreas Pass, a 22-mile-long road located on the Continental Divide. History comes alive in Como as the Historical Society is busy working on restoring an operational steam locomotive and hold the annual Boreas Pass Railway Day event in August. Next, we stumble across Deerfield. Now, Deerfield isn't your typical ghost town. It was started by Oliver T. Jackson, who wanted to create a settlement for African Americans. While admirable, the first season was hard for the settlers, who had trouble farming the land. By 1921, there were over 700 residents, and the prosperity grew, valuing the town at over $1 million, until the Great Depression of the 1930s hit. By the 1940s, only a decade later, only 12 people were left as permanent residents, and in 1948, the town's founder passed away. But now, as of 1998, Denver's Black American West Museum has made efforts to preserve the town for future generations. And last, but certainly not least, is St. Elmo, Colorado. This spooky little town is one of the most accessible and best preserved ghost towns in the West. Of the 43 buildings remaining scattered about, there are a saloon, a courthouse, and a mercantile. And while those haven't seen customers in a long time, there's also a working general store open seasonally in the summer. The most populated of the towns we've seen so far, back in its heyday, in 1880, St. Elmo, which was called Forest City back then, had about 2,000 residents. As with all the rest, when the mines dwindled and the train service closed, this caused the town to die off. With cabin rentals and a working general store, however, this small tourist town is still on the map and still well traveled for those looking for a glimpse into the past. So, this brings us to the conclusion of our little tales, and now we must depart from the ghost towns and the fossil fields and leave the legends and mysteries behind. Colorado sure has a great deal of the unknown to explore, and the stories this land could tell could fill an adventurer's mind for over a year. I love the stories presented to me in books and legends, and being able to continue the tradition of verbal storytelling. There are many more out there, and I, for one, could talk for hours upon hours and listen to stories about them. But for now, there are other topics and other places to visit. Thank you for listening. So, this brings us to the conclusion of our little tales, and now we must depart from the ghost towns and the fossil fields and leave the legends and mysteries behind. Colorado sure has a great deal of the unknown to explore, and the stories this land could tell could fill an adventurer's mind for over a year. I love the stories presented to me in books and legends, and being able to continue the tradition of verbal storytelling. There are many more out there, and I, for one, could talk for hours upon hours and listen to stories about them. But for now, there are other topics and other places to visit. Thank you for listening.